Brother Jamin has kindly agreed to exhort us this morning on the theme, God is with you in 22. So I'm looking forward to that, as I'm sure you guys are. And as an introduction to that, he's asked that we take a reading from Genesis 37. So I'll ask Braden to come and read that. So thank you, Jamin, for agreeing to exhort us, and we'll now ask him to come up and exhort us on his theme, God is with you in 22.
Well, good morning, my dear brothers and sisters. Lovely to see everybody here this morning. Good morning, Dave. Just a comment on some of the hymns. This exhort is based on an incident in the life of Joseph, and while the hymns don't refer to the story of Joseph directly, the powerful themes of Jesus the Saviour, to whom every knee will bow, and Jerusalem, the centre of the kingdom, and another hymn that we're going to sing, Ancient Words, Ever True, Changing Me, Changing You, into people who trust in God, are very sympathetic concepts in this life of Joseph's story. So I've entitled this exhort, God is with you in 22. And I've done this because I'm trying to convey a message that no matter what happens to you, that no matter what decisions you make, whether they're good decisions or poor decisions, that no matter how dark your life may become sometimes, or how distraught you may become with your personal circumstances, that God is doing it or allowing it. And as a minimum, He is there with you in every moment and every decision of your life. And He's asking you to trust Him. And He's asking you to commit to Him in every aspect of your life. So our daily readings have taken us through the life of Joseph. So let's go to our reading this morning, Genesis chapter 37. So Genesis chapter 37, how old was Joseph in the story? Well, we don't have to guess. It's there in verse 2, he was 17. What's it like to be 17? Is there any 17-year-olds here this morning? I can vaguely remember what it's like to be 17. Someone once observed that being 17 is like getting a new car finance deal. There's 0% interest for 12 months. Jokes. At Hunter Valley, we have a bunch of young people who are 17 or a little bit older, and some who are coming up to 17. What's it like to be 17? You're the second youngest, and all your older brothers can't stand you. You're 17, you're the favourite of your father, but the favourite means that your brothers are always jealous of you and always angry with you. You're 17 and your father's given you a gift that he didn't give to anyone else in the family. And when you go to see if your brothers are okay one day, they're actually talking about killing you. And they hate you that much that when you get there, they grab you and you're absolutely powerless. 10 big boys. And they throw you into the bottom of a dry well. And at 17, in the mud of the bottom of this dry well, you're looking up at your big brothers, who you thought would always be the ones there to help you, crying out to them, help me. And they're taunting, they're laughing, they're joking about you. And what are you thinking? For hours and hours, and suddenly the rope comes down. And you're crying with relief, and tears are running down your face. You're ready to forgive the brothers for that silly prank. And you're climbing up and you can't wait to get home to father. And you get to the top, they grab you again, and you watch in horror as what appears to be money changing hands between your brothers and some traders, some scary guys with big wild eyes and big black beards, and they roughly grab you and they tie you up and they throw you on a camel. And you watch your small group of brothers get smaller and smaller in the distance as they make jokes about you. What's it like to be 17 and end up in a slave market, up for sale with all kinds of terrifying men coming up to inspect you to see if you are going to be the new slave for them and they're going to be your new owner? Are you thinking about Father? Are you thinking about home? Are you thinking about God? Are you thinking about whether God even works in your life or not? Why would you be thinking about God? The only thing you might be thinking is, well, why did God let this happen to me? Or if you are thinking about God, God, where are you? Do you even care about me? I'm scared to death. Maybe at 17 he doesn't really even know if he believes in God. I don't know. He's probably having difficulty breathing. He's probably petrified. He's probably on the brink of collapsing. It's a tough situation. Do some of us have tough situations in our lives? Do we sometimes feel on the brink of collapsing? I do. Is Joseph's situation better or worse than any situation we might be facing in our life now? Have we had experiences like this, worse than this, or maybe not quite as bad as this? There are little things in this story that remind us of some of the difficulties that we have been through. Have you ever wondered about whether God is actually there with you? Is he involved in your life in any way? You know, some people look at horrible things that happen and they say, oh, God wouldn't do this, God wouldn't do that. And here's a 17-year-old, he's been thrown into slavery, thrown into a pit. There's lots of hatred and envy, and God doesn't use violence or trauma. And look, the question for all of us today from the outset has to be, was God involved in this whole saga of Joseph being sold into slavery or not? It's a yes or no question. The answer has got to be yes. And there's evidence of this. You know, somebody who actually comes out and announces that this is the fact, that God is involved, that this whole saga of Joseph being sold into slavery, somebody actually says it. It's Joseph himself. You have a quick look at just one verse in Genesis 45 where he's talking to his brothers in Egypt. And he says in verse 5, these remarkable words: don't be grieved, don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me, for it was God who was sending me to preserve your life. And verse 7, it was God who sent me before you to preserve your life, a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. You threw me in the pit, but it was actually God doing it, sending me to preserve your life. You thought you were selling me to the Ishmaelites, but in fact, it was God who was saving you. So in our chapter, in 24 verses, it's just the last 24 verses, Joseph wakes up one morning to check on his brethren for his father, and that afternoon he's a slave facing death and going to Egypt, so that God can change the course of the entire world. Let's look at the story a little closer. Let's look for God. You've got to find God, because Joseph really, he's telling us, he's requesting us, he's imploring us, look for God in your life. He's there. Because if you know how to find God in this story, you will know how to find God in your own life. That makes a big difference to your life. When we read this story, it sounds like a pretty normal chain of events in a dysfunctional family. They ended up with an unhappy ending. What did we expect? It's not a normal story. We have to see God. We have to see God making it happen. Just hold on, the computer's just jumped here. For some reason. What we need to look for is to see Joseph as Jesus, and it's like a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. Let's take a look at some of the pieces. Now, verse 12 to 36 mentions a bunch of locations. Can we just, Marianne, can we have the first overhead up on the screen? Okay, so you can see that 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel is that circle bit on the map. That's the 12 tribes of Israel. And the green line down the bottom, that's the 12 tribes of Ishmael. And I've got a reference there, Genesis 25, verse 18. And Ishmael's descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur. And there I've got Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt. There it is, opposite Egypt, as you go towards Assyria. And they lived in opposition to all his brothers. So there's where the Ishmaelites come from. There's where the Israelites come from. Okay, can we have the next slide, Mary? Okay. Now, there's also some other places mentioned in this record, starting down the bottom at Hebron. Then we move up to Shechem, Dothan, and up the top, Gilead. All right. Thanks, Miriam. We'll come back to that shortly. Have a look at verse 12, Genesis 37. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Why? Why did Joseph's brethren go to feed their father's flock in Shechem? Where was Jacob? Well, verse 14 tells us where Jacob was. He's in the Hebron Valley. Why did the brethren go to Shechem? Well, because they couldn't feed the sheep. Because there was nothing to feed them. Because there's a famine on the way. Have a quick look at Genesis 41, verse 56. It tells us there's a famine. And by the time the family was forced to go to Egypt for food, there was a famine over the face of the earth. So verse 13 of Genesis 37, Israel says to Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send thee unto them. And he said, here am I. The father sends his son to the brethren, and the son says, here am I. He says, verse 14, go and see if your brethren and the flocks are okay. Let me know. So Joseph, he leaves Hebron, he gets to Shechem, and there's also another reason that the brethren went to Shechem, because Jacob owned some land at Shechem. And he lived there for a while. Remember, he paid 100 pieces of money for this land. So hopefully there's a bit of feed on his land at Shechem. Genesis 33, verse 18. This is where he buys the land at Shechem. It says, and Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. So everything seems normal. Jacob owns some land. He's bought it. He's paid money for it. It's just another day, but it's about now that the story starts to get a little bit weird. Why? Well, verse 15 is why. Verse 15, a certain man finds him. And behold, Joseph was wandering in the field when the man asked him, saying, what seekest thou? So Joseph gets to Shechem, and where are the boys? Where's the flocks? Joseph is wandering around in Jacob's field. He's in his father's land. And there just happens to be a man in the field, not just any man. What kind of man? Verse 15. He's a certain man. Now, there's this certain man in the field. Does Joseph say, hey, what are you doing in my dad's field? No. It's actually the certain man that says to Joseph, what are you looking for? What do you want? Joseph doesn't even bat an eyelid. Verse 16, he says, well, I'm looking for my brethren. Can you tell me where they are? Like, if you bumped into a total stranger in a field and you said, I'm looking for my brothers, do you know where they are? Who are your brothers? What are you talking about? But not this certain man. He knows exactly what Joseph's talking about. Did you notice that? He knows exactly where the brothers are, and he tells Joseph where they are without any further questions. Is that a bit weird? And also in verse 15, there's something also that's a bit weird. The man was looking for him. How do we know that? Verse 15, can't explain the language here. A certain man found him. Found him? Was he looking for him? And the certain man says in verse 17, oh, they've gone. I heard them talking. They said, let's go to Dothan. He heard them talking. How did he hear them talking? How close did this certain man get to the brothers while they were in Shechem? So Joseph turns up to Shechem. He wanders around a field. He can't find his brothers, but a certain man tells him where they are. So they start at Hebron. They go quite a long way to Shechem. And then they go half the distance again to Dothan. Now, I'll ask you this question. Would Joseph have had any idea where his brothers were if he'd turned up to Shechem and the certain man hadn't told him where they'd gone? What would Joseph most likely have done if he'd got to Shechem, couldn't find his brothers? He'd go home. And if he went home, where wouldn't he have gone? Well, he wouldn't have gone to Dothan. And if he didn't go to Dothan, he wouldn't have been ambushed by his brothers. And if he hadn't been ambushed by his brothers, he wouldn't have been sold to the Ishmaelites. And he may never have ended up in Egypt. So this certain man, he asks an awesome question. Gives Joseph vital information. What's the question? Did you notice the question? He says, what seekest thou? Has anybody heard that question asked before in the Bible? What seekest thou? Do you know that question has only been asked 8 times in the Bible before? I'll tell you what the incidences were. In John 1 verse 38, Jesus says to the disciples, what seek ye? In John 18 verse 4 and John 18 verse 7, Jesus says to the crucifixion mob, whom seek ye? In John 10 verse 15, Jesus says to Mary, whom seekest thou? In Luke 24 verse 5, the angels say to the women who came to Jesus' tomb, why seek ye the living among the dead? And in Jeremiah 45 verse 5, an obscure little incident, God says to Jeremiah's scribe Barak, what are you seeking? Great things for yourself. So when you look at this question, amazingly, it's only a question that's ever been asked by God, by Jesus, and by angels. And also by this certain man. Who is this certain man? Not just Tom, Dick or Harry loitering in a field. Do you know there's some Aramaic language versions of the Jewish Old Testament, and one of them is called the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. And we have access to a 1862 edition of that today. And look, I don't know if this version is a translation of an earlier manuscript. I don't know if it's been edited by the translator, but let me read you this one verse from this version. Genesis 37, verse 15. Let me read it to you from this version. And Gabriel, in the likeness of a man, found him wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, what seekest thou? And the Jews would claim that that's a similar instance to what happened to Daniel, where Daniel in chapter 9, verse 21 to 22 says, while I was in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I'd seen in a vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. Was this certain man a man? Was he an angel? Was he a man sent by God and therefore a messenger, or in other words, an angel? Whoever he was, is crucial to this story. Why? Because his advice changes the entire course of the world. You know, Joseph thinks the man's answer is okay, verse 16. So he went after his brethren and he found them in Dothan. Now look, what are the chances, what are the odds of all these events, brothers and sisters, happening to get Joseph to Dothan? Jacob's got to be an owner of land at Shechem. It's got to be a natural place to feed his sheep. Only there's no grass for them to eat at Shechem. So the brothers decide to go half the distance again to Dothan. That is a fair hike. They end up in Dothan. Joseph's wandering around Shechem. He doesn't know where his brothers are. There's a man looking for him in Shechem. The man says, I overheard your brothers saying that they were going to Dothan. And Joseph turns up in Dothan. In Dothan. What's so important about Dothan? Well, let's go to the start of the whole story about Joseph being sold into Egypt. Let's look at the brothers' plan. Verse 18, Genesis 37. What did they want to do to Joseph right up front? They wanted to murder him. And verse 19 to 20, then what are they going to do next? Well, they're going to cast him into a pit, dead. And then what? And then they'll make up lies about how he died. But Reuben steps in, chuck him in the pit, teach him a lesson, but let's not kill him. What did Reuben think he'd do later? Well, he was going to free him and take him home to father. So what do? Verse 23 and 24, they take his coat and they throw him into the pit. Interesting. What do we know about this pit or well? Well, we know one thing. There's no water in it. Why? Because famine is coming. Drought's on the way. There's no rain. So the boys throw him into the pit. They've thrown their brother into the pit. What would you expect them to do next? Verse 25 is what they did next. They have lunch. That was a good day's work, fellas. Good job. Who's hungry? And they sit down to eat some bread. And brothers and sisters, this is where the story actually begins. I love this fantastic expression in verse 25. Have a look at it. They lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold. They lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold. In other words, out of the blue. Out of the blue. Appeared a company of Ishmaelites from Gilead up the top, with camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it to Egypt. It's like a movie. Suddenly on the screen, bang! It's full of Ishmaelites. Where are they from? They're from Gilead. Where do Ishmaelites come from? Can we go to PowerPoint? The first slide, the second slide, Miriam? No, not that one. The first one. No. Yeah, that one. This is where the tribes of Ishmael come from. They come from the land of Shur to Havilah, not from Gilead. Why are they visiting Gilead? Well, Jeremiah gives us the clue as to what the Ishmaelites are doing in Gilead. Have a look at Jeremiah 8, verse 22, where Jeremiah says, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is not the health of the daughter of my people recovered? It's rhetorical, of course. Of course there's balm in Gilead. The land of Gilead was known for its balm. It was known for this liquid rosin that flowed out of certain trees. And because of easy access to medicinal ingredients, many physicians made their home at Gilead. So the Ishmaelites have come from their land, which is from Shur to Havilah, up to Gilead. They've loaded up on spices and balm and myrrh, and now they're heading down to Egypt on the trade route. And the trade route, can we go to the next slide? The trade route, which town do you suppose the trade route goes through? You guessed it. It goes through Dothan. The Ishmaelites happened to be in Dothan that day at lunchtime. The boys looked up, and behold, out of the blue, the screen was full of Ishmaelites on the day. Not at breakfast time, not at dinner time, not yesterday, not tomorrow, not next week, not last week. Today at lunchtime, when Joseph was in the pit. Now, when you think about it, being there today at lunchtime, this is, of course, on the back of a major planning exercise. It's a completed business plan. It's a trade journey from Shur up to Gilead to Dothan to Egypt and back home. And in the progress of their commercial tour, they ended up in Dothan on the day. On the day that Joseph was in the pit, they ended up in Dothan. And just as an aside, who were these Ishmaelites, by the way? Let's go to the third PowerPoint, Marianne, and hit it once. Okay, so Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael, they were brothers. Hit it again. Isaac had Jacob, Ishmael had sons, and they were first cousins. Once more. Jacob had Joseph, and obviously Ishmael's son had a son, and they were second cousins. These guys are the second cousins of Jacob and his brothers. So the lesson is never trust your second cousin. No, that's not the lesson at all. Now Judah comes up with a bright idea. He's got a bright idea. Verse 26. What's profitable if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? I've got a great idea. Verse 27. He says, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. They're our second cousins after all. Let's not kill him. He's our brother. He's our flesh. Everybody seems, oh yeah, good idea. Great idea. So verse 28, the merchantmen pass by. The boys flag them down. They take Joseph out of the pit. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver, and Joseph was brought to Egypt. Now let's just skip ahead in our thinking in God's plan for a little bit. How was God going to bring in the new covenant of life through Christ? Well, he had to replace the old covenant. And to have an old covenant, it needed to be in place with who? Well, with his people. And how did he put this old covenant in place with his people? Well, he did it at Sinai with Moses. And the old covenant was put into place because God needed to rescue and redeem his people from Egypt. He needed to save them from the famine in the first place. He needed to establish them as a great and mighty nation, secondly. He needed them to develop an understanding of slavery and sin and bondage. He needed to prepare his people to joyfully take possession of the promised land. He needed to develop their appreciation of salvation. And finally, he needed to save them eternally. And it was only going to work if he could put the Saviour of the world into Egypt. And Joseph, of course, eventually realised that, as we quoted before from Genesis 45, when he was talking to his brothers, he said, God sent me to do this. God sent me to save your lives with a great deliverance. So selling me into Egypt, brothers, was how God did all this. Don't you take any credit. It's not the Ishmaelites or the Midianites. God directed the whole scene, every detail, every twist and turn. Now, what are the odds of all these factors lining up to get this end result? Every one of these things had to happen for Joseph to get to Egypt. If one factor drops out, Joseph doesn't get to Egypt. I've come up with 12 points. There could be many, many more. They're non-negotiable. It had to happen. There's probably more. For example, there has to be no food at Hebron. Jacob needs to own some land at Shechem. There has to be no food at Shechem. The brothers decide to make a decision to go to another crucial destination. Joseph gets lost in Shechem. An angel has got to appear and look for him, directing him to Dothan. There's got to be a famine starting in Dothan so they can throw him into a dry well. Reuben has got to talk the brothers out of throwing him into the well instead of killing him. Dothan's got to be on the spice route. Gilead has to be the place of traditional balm and spice manufacture. The Ishmaelites have got to plan a trip from Shur to Gilead to Dothan and end up in Egypt. The Ishmaelites must be in Dothan at lunchtime on the day. God is there in every moment, in every decision, in every emotion, in every event. Listen to what Joseph's brothers said about that moment, Genesis 42. I'll read from the NIV. Verse 21 of Genesis 42. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen, and that's why this distress has come on us." Psalm 105, verse 17 and 18 makes a comment on this circumstance. In verse 17 of Psalm 105, it says, "God sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron." They locked him up in iron chains. That's probably the Midianites or the Egyptians. Did you know that? He's pleading for his life. His brethren are preparing to kill him. He's distressed above measure. Did Joseph realize that God was there in every moment, in every decision, in every emotion, in every event? Maybe not. But brothers and sisters, we probably don't fully get it either. That God is there in every moment, in every decision, in every emotion, in every event in our lives. And when you look at this chapter of Joseph's life, it might just appear to be a series of coincidences and unfortunate events, but it's anything but that, brothers and sisters. It's the opposite to that. It is not a series of coincidences and unfortunate events. God was fully involved in every detail of Joseph's life. And hopefully, after you and I have considered this story, we can start to appreciate more that God is involved in every detail of our lives. Alternatively, you might say, well, look, God is not interested in me. That's the problem. I'm not like Joseph or anything like him. All right, then. That's what you want to say? Is that what you want to say? Do you want to say that? Who are you like, then? If you're not like Joseph, who are you like? Are you like Reuben, who disgraced his father by getting involved with his father's concubine? Is that who you're like? Are you like Judah, who disgraced himself by getting involved with his daughter-in-law because he thought she was a prostitute? Is that who you like? Are you like the sister Dinah, who got into trouble because she wanted to get involved with all the cool girls of the world? Is that who you like? Are you like Simeon and Levi, who murdered a whole village because they didn't like what a young man had done to their sister? Is that who you like? Are you like the rest of Joseph's brothers, who are filled with envy and hatred all the time against Joseph and were delighted to kill him? You're more like those brothers, you think, than Joseph, you think? Well, if you think that, which you might, it was actually those brothers that Joseph was talking about when he said in Genesis 45, verse 7, God sent me before you to save your lives by a great deliverance. God saved those brothers as well. And if you are too much like those brothers Stop it. It only ended in disaster and sorrow for them. Let's look for God. You've got to find God. Joseph is telling us, he's requesting us, he's imploring us, look for God in your life. He's there. Because now we know how to find God in this story. We know how to find God in our story. It makes a big difference to your life. You know, some people have said to me from time to time with a bit of a sigh, you know, wouldn't it be nice if, excuse me, wouldn't it be nice if God could just direct us in the right way so we could see him in our lives? So as a final thought, I'm going to share one of the most important pieces of advice in the entire scripture, which also comes with a bonus guarantee, and it's from Proverbs chapter 3. And we know it's talking to children and to young people and to us because it starts off in verse 1 with, my son. Proverbs chapter 3. Verse 5, trust in Yahweh with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he shall direct your paths. You know, brothers and sisters, we may never work out all the complications in our lives. And we shouldn't try to, really. We just need to trust in God with all our heart, because everyone else in our lives will let us down. Your partner will let you down. Your friends will let you down. Your brothers and sisters will let you down. Your parents, your children, if you ever have any, your extended family, your workmates, anyone you get involved with will let you down. Except for God, who will direct your life. You know, the Apostle Peter brings our attention to Joseph as Jesus, really, in 1 Peter chapter 2. And he says this in verse 21. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled, threatened not. When he suffered, when he was reviled, he reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not. But what did he do? What did Jesus do? Well, in the words of verse 23 of 1 Peter chapter 2, Jesus committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. It's what we have to do. Let's commit ourselves today to God, who is there in every moment, in every decision, in every emotion, in every event of our lives, because God is with you in 22.